What's good, YouTube? We're talking college sports in the Deep South, where college football is king, and on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Once again, it's Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, and we're talking about Auburn like it's nobody's business. I want to wish everybody a happy 4th of July. Hopefully you guys are being responsible out there. Hopefully you all are being safe and making sure that you are keeping everything in the road. Don't drink and drive and all that other different kind of stuff that folks like to do on 4th of July. We want to make mention about the Auburn Tigers, guys. We're talking about a situation where the Auburn Tigers have really made a move as far as recruiting goes. If we think about prior to Big Cat Weekend, Auburn was kind of like on the everybody was kind of putting Auburn on the downward trough as it relates to recruiting. Auburn was probably in some outlets as low as a number 30 recruiting ranking. But then after Big Cat Weekend, things started to dramatically change for the Auburn Tigers. We're talking about a month and a half swing for the Tigers, going from about number 30 in the recruiting class to number 13. That's only 2 spots away from where Auburn finished up last year. In 2019, Auburn finished with the number 11 recruiting class. The only two guys that were significantly lost in that class was George Pickens and Cameron Kelly out of Chesapeake, Virginia. Probably the biggest flip for the Auburn Tigers in that recruiting class was George Pickens, who eventually flipped to Georgia. Now, I actually saw this coming last year. Towards the end, George Pickens still hadn't committed, still hadn't signed, and I knew Georgia had lost Riley Ridley, so I knew Kirby Smart was going to make a real strong push to sell George Pickens on the on his how he would do well at Georgia, and it was actually wound up being a good pick. But nonetheless, George Pickens winds up being a Georgia Bulldog. So as we stand right now, the Auburn Tigers, who would like to assume that Gus Malzahn is on the hot seat, has the number 13 recruiting class, which is, I think, pretty impressive considering everything. And if you think about the recruiting, the guys who are leading the recruiting charge, you're talking about Rodney Gardner, you're talking about Travis Williams, you're talking about Kenny Dillingham. Gus Malzahn really has put together a very, very good recruiting staff there at Auburn. I mean, of course, we still have the Gus haters and rightfully so. But then when you think about the reason that, at the moment that you really don't particularly like Gus, it's kind of sort of your own fault. If you look at the 2013 season and you look at how that outcome turned about, you're talking about a first-year coach. Typically, a first-year coach doesn't go to the national championship in his first year. There was a lot of non-sustainable instances that happened in that first year. One is the prayer at Jordan Hare. Now, the prayer at Jordan Hare didn't particularly have to happen. Auburn could have beat Georgia straight up, but Auburn allowed Georgia to come back because Auburn was beating Georgia all over the field during that game of the prayer to Jordan Hare. But the situation was the game was justifiably won in a miracle-type fashion where Auburn actually should have won that game straight up. They were beating Georgia to death. But, a late comeback by Georgia put Auburn in a position to where a miracle was the only way they could win that particular ball game. Same way with the Iron Bowl, for example. Auburn had played toe-to-toe with Alabama, was really moving the ball very well, was down as much as 21-7 to come back in that game to give themselves an opportunity to win that particular game. And the kick six, they took advantage of it. Who knows what would have happened in overtime? Maybe Auburn wins, maybe Alabama wins. Who knows what happens in overtime? But at the same time, you're judging Gus Malzahn. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. I'm not a Gus Malzahn mediocrity advocate, but I think we need to be real about this in the fact that Gus Malzahn, probably shouldn't have been in the position that he was the first year. And now we're judging Gus Malzahn based on his first year situation and not allowing him to really develop the kind of team that he wants. Because first of all, you're talking about a high school coach basically who doesn't know what he wants. But I think based on what I'm seeing recruiting wise for the Auburn Tigers, I think Gus Malzahn is starting to figure out what it takes to win in the SEC. Now, here's the caveat to all this. If Gus Malzahn doesn't do well this year, then, it's just not happening for Gus Malzahn. Now, I'm not saying that Gus Malzahn has to win a national championship, because in the SEC, not saying that the SEC is like necessarily superior to other conferences, but when you think about how the SEC beats each other up, and that there's, like my man Late Kick says, there's only so many wins that can go around. Auburn is in a situation to where, they have to take advantage of all opportunities given. And when you think about the roster that Auburn has, the experience that Auburn has coming back, and that stretch in the SEC between Texas A&M and LSU, Auburn has a very, very viable opportunity to be very productive during that particular time. Will Auburn take a loss during that stretch? I would go out on a limb and say, if I'm a betting man, yes, they're going to lose at least one game during that stretch. However, in a more likely situation, considering where Gus Malzahn is, being on the hot seat at Auburn, I think he needs to do the best he can considering the roster that's coming back. I think he's going to have the best secondary that he's had in his tenure. He's going to have the most running back depth that he's had in his tenure. He has the best opportunity to be successful on a high level than he's had since his arrival in 2013. Top to bottom, you have a senior class offensive line coming back. You have a high-level defensive line coming back. You have a lot of athleticism at the linebacker position. So there's no reason that this Auburn team couldn't be successful. Now, what I've talked about a lot on social media is the fact that if Auburn can have an LSU from last year type season, those guys went 10-3. Nobody expected LSU to do anything surmountable last year, but you can't discount LSU because they recruit so well. But if Auburn can have that kind of year, give themselves an opportunity down the stretch, you can't really discount what Gus Malzahn is doing. He's put together a nice staff. Kenny Dillingham, Rodney Garner, Wesley McGriff, Carnell Williams, Cody Burns seems to be very, very well versed in the recruiting game as it relates to recruiting good wide receivers to the Tigers. So you just really, really have to see how this thing plays out. And you have to understand that Gus Malzahn has not had the tools, in my honest opinion, that he has had coming into this season. The only caveat to this is the fact that the schedule is kind of iffy. You have an Oregon team that has, low-key aspirations to win the Pac-12 championship and possibly do a little bit more. I think these guys are extra talented. But at the same time, I think Gus Malzahn and his staff has the tools in place to really put together a nice season for the Tigers. I think in order for Gus to really, really get off the hot seat in a likely world, he probably needs to win about 9 games and have the opportunity to win 10 with the bowl game. And I think this is something that he can do with what he has in place. He's now calling plays. He now has a quarterback who, whether it's Bo Nix or Joey Gatewood, who can actually make this thing happen for him to where, this thing could actually happen. You look at last year, 2018, just a little bit more offensive production. And Auburn has a 10-win season. You talk about an Auburn team that beat a really, really good Texas A&M team with only 225 yards of offensive production. Some late game heroics, i.e. Noah Igbenogany and Ryan Davis, puts Auburn in a position to where they're a ranked team down the stretch going into Georgia. So we have to see how this thing plays out for the Auburn Tigers and how no matter what you guys like to say, a lot of you got, like, there's a subculture in the Auburn fan base that are absolutely Gus haters. Gus can do, I'm talking about Gus can win you the national championship, and you'll find a caveat as to why he still doesn't need to be there. But I'm telling you, for right now, as it stands, no matter what you like or what you love, Gus Malzahn is and his staff that he has now gives Auburn the best opportunity down the stretch to potentially be a great team. They're doing well on the recruiting trail. You look at some of the recruits that are being brought in. Some of the hard commits. This is what I want y'all to understand. A hard commit does not mean that they're going to stay, but that says a lot perception-wise. You're talking about Trenton Simpson out of Mallard Creek, Charlotte, North Carolina. Very high-end recruit at the at the outside linebacker position. Huge for Auburn. Wesley Steiner. If Wesley Steiner, see what a lot of folks don't know about Wesley Steiner at .9630, this guy eventually, when it's all said and done, is going to be a 5-star recruit. And the high-end schools are going to be chirping once the season gets going. And I think, he's going to have a great senior year, and his value is going to skyrocket. So Auburn is really going to have to fight to sustain him. Kobe Hudson could possibly, out of LaGrange, Georgia, could possibly get that 5th star. So you're talking about a potentially top 10 recruiting class for the Auburn Tigers going into, the signing day for 2020. Now, this is what I want you guys to look at. Right now, nobody is signed. Hard commits is just saying, hey, I want to come here. This is what I'm feeling right now. But you got to realize that there's a lot of football, high school-wise, that has to be played. And there's a lot of football, Auburn-wise, that has to be played. You got to see how this thing turns out. If Auburn has a successful season, beats Oregon, goes in the LSU game possibly, undefeated, which, that's far-fetched in my opinion. But if they do that, you're talking about Auburn being able to not only solidify this class, where they have been able to, kind of keep hold of, some linebackers and some wide receivers, something that they really needed, and some offensive linemen like Tate Johnson, like I said, Tate Johnson, Javion Cohen, who I believe will eventually be a 5-star guy as well. Avery Jernigan, all of these guys could potentially catapult this Auburn situation to where you're talking about a top 10 recruiting class for the Auburn Tigers. Let me know what you guys think about this video. Auburn is making some pretty decent strides. You're talking about a huge swing from like a 30 ranked recruiting class all the way to the number 13 recruiting class currently. And all Auburn's got to do now is just win ball games and continue the perception. Once again, it's Vernon Speak Sports Auburn. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and get the Fearless and True gang. Get it really active in the comment section. As always, on this channel, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger. War Eagle.